First is here with Mr. Chestnut and Mr. DeGuerin. We have Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Balian. Jurors and alternates all are present, and the reading may resume.
Dr. Harvey, you are still under the same oath.
When we last left, Doctor, we were discussing, I believe, the question was, I had asked you if you look at the torso below the chest and the arms and the legs, whether or not you could find any evidence of stippling burns into the skin from gunshot wounds or anything like that. You recall?
Yes, sir.
And again, your answer regarding from the chest down, arms, hands, and legs, did you find any evidence of that type of powder burns to the skin or anything like that?
I did not.
And again, the only wounds you found on the hands were what?
The wounds on the hands were sharp force injuries.
I believe you testified when I was showing you those photographs that were admitted that it was your opinion that some of the light blurred out some of those wounds on the photographs.
Yes,
Did you prepare a diagram of those wounds also on the hands?
I did.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 500. Is that an accurate copy of your drawing of the wounds to the hands?
It is.
Does this reflect the wounds as you saw them?
Yes, it does.
Although the photographs may not have shown them in their entirety, is that correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, the state offers 500.
No objection. It's admitted.
Do you recall whether or not you recovered any items of clothing with the body parts?
There was a left sleeve of the shirt that was attached as a remnant to the front part of the shirt.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as 477, 478, 479, 480, 481. Do you recognize those?
I do.
Do these fairly and accurately represent the shirt at the time you first saw it?
They do.
Your Honor, the state offers 477 through 481.
No objection. They are admitted.
And doctor, that shirt has been admitted, but I don't want you to have to handle it. Is it correct the part of the shirt that you recovered was simply just the left front quarter
Yes.
and the left sleeve?
Yes.
Now regarding one part that we haven't talked about yet is the neck area. Did you have any opportunity to view the neck and the top shoulder area for any signs of stippling or gunpowder burns or anything like that?
I did.
And did you observe any type of stippling or anything like that on the neck area?
I did not.
Can you describe the nature of the cuts, if any, that you saw in the neck area separating the neck from the head?
The skin surface at the neck were sharply incised and cut away. The residual muscle tissue was cut in what appeared to be a sharp instrumentation. There were saw marks across the vertebral body for the 6th cervical vertebrae, where there was a sawing activity that produced a plain transection of the vertebral column.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as States 456. Does that accurately reflect the neck area at the time you viewed it?
It does.
Your Honor, the state tenders and would offer 456. We are going to keep this some distance, Doctor. But looking at States 456, do you have your pointer?
I do.
Can you point to the jury where the vertebrae that you referred to that were cut, where they would be located in this photograph?
They are not really visible because of the overlying from the tissue. It is sunk down in, but the vertebrae are...
First, let me ask you, where's the back of the shoulders?
The shoulders appear to be back up here.
Okay.
And the vertebral column is in this area, but appears to be receded.
And when you say receded, sunk in underneath the tissue?
Yes.
And the front part of the neck area of Mr. Black would be where in this photograph?
I think it would be right here.
Towards the bottom of States 456?
Correct.
Describe for us, please, well, the cuts in the skin and the muscle. Were you saying those were similar to the other cuts that you saw on the body parts, the limbs?
For the other transections or dismemberment areas?
Yes?
Yes, I believe so.
Did you get a good look at the dismemberment at the bone itself? I guess the neck area. Did you observe that in person?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and you said it was the 6th cervical vertebrae, is that correct?
Correct.
Meaning there's how many more above it?
There's 5 above it.
All extending into the base of the skull and the head, is that correct?
Well, when you cut through the bony area, there's a hollow space at the back side of the bone through which the spinal cord itself runs and connects the brain to the rest of the body.
Have you in your practice had to remove or dealt with any removal of limbs of any type on a decedent?
Yes.
And would that also include having cut through bone or vertebrae, or what is your experience in that respect?
My experience with removing a skull was a process of using a scalpel for sharp dissection and separating out the joints between the various individual bones that are part of the neck.
You physically removed an entire skull from a...
Yes, I did.
And what type of tools did you use?
I used a scalpel.
What's the nature of the length of that process for you in your training?
Oh, that actually is a difficult process. It takes me, 15, 20 minutes.
And the limbs, have you ever removed any other limbs? Have to cut through femur or humerus, anything like that?
I don't have a recollection of actually amputating a limb to look at it. I've done a dissection with the body intact, and I've done many dissections on extremities, but I don't recall ever sawing a leg off.
You have occasion to cut through a skull, do you not?
I do.
Do you use a scalpel or some other instrument?
No, I use a striker saw.
That's just a small hand-powered saw?
Yes, it's an oscillating saw with fine teeth on it that cuts through bone. It was originally designed to cut through plaster casts.
And that process of having to cut through the bony part of the scalp, is that something that takes time, or is that time or not time even with your power saw?
Even with the power saw, it takes time. 5 minutes to take the top part off the skull.
Upon completing at least the part of the external exam that we have discussed so far, did you have occasion to go internal?
I did.
And would you describe that process you used to enter the chest cavity?
We make a Y-shaped incision that starts at the shoulders and comes down to the central lower chest, and then goes vertically down to the pubic area. And the skin is reflected and removed from the chest wall.
Are you going through bone and muscle tissue there too?
You're going through the muscle tissue. Once you have the interior or front part of the ribs exposed, then you can take either a striker saw or a cutting device to cut the ribs and remove the interior chest plate so that you can expose the heart and lungs and the contents of the chest cavity.
And at the time you were doing this on Mr. Black, you were still looking for a cause of death, is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you recall just visually what you saw in your own eyes when you opened up the chest cavity? Anything particular about the lungs or the heart that you noticed?
I would say that there's nothing terribly remarkable. There are changes of decomposition that are starting, and there's some fluid which has escaped from the vascularity of the heart that is present in the chest cavity that is blood tinged. There's odor production, breakdown of fat into oily substances.
Did you have occasion to remove either the heart or the lungs or both?
I did.
And directing you to the heart, your examination of the heart, did you take a photograph of the heart upon its removal?
We took a photograph of the heart and lungs in place in the chest before we removed them as a block.
Did you have a chance to view them separately then?
Once, yes.
Doctor, I'll show you what's been marked for identification as 492. Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
Does it accurately represent the heart at the time you saw it?
It does.
Doctor, at this time, you are doing the internal examination. You don't know the cause of death, do you?
Correct.
Did you find something relevant to the heart upon your visual observation that indicated this man may have had a heart attack?
Yes,
And heart attacks can cause death, can they not?
they can.
We're going to do this one like we did the other one, Doctor. Can you describe for the jury with your pointer visually any area that you thought indicated a healing process or something of some kind or some kind of signs of a heart attack?
I can. Would it be all right to try to orient the jury as to what we were looking at here?
Please, that's your photograph.
The heart comes as a big orange, about the size of a fist. And what I've done here is that I've taken and cut it right through the center portion. And we're looking at the bottom half of the heart with the open chambers. The bottom of the heart exposed so that we can see that. This portion right here is the left ventricle of the heart, and this is the back wall. And it has pinkish gray discoloration and thinning on the back wall. And that is an area of infarction or death that has occurred because of severe blockage to the coronary arteries that provide the blood supply to the heart. This is a typical heart attack picture.
When you said death, you referring to death of tissue or death of Morris Black?
Death of tissue.
Okay. Did you follow up in any way regarding your findings or on just visual examination of the heart?
I did.
Would that include microscopic work or slide work, something along those lines?
It did.
And what were you looking for in that follow-up to determine whether or not we are looking at a possible heart attack or something else?
I was looking for something that might indicate how old the process of the infarction was.
And when you were saying infarction, what's the layman's words?
Well, it's a heart attack. It's dead muscle tissue in the heart wall.
And what can you find typically? Well, let me ask you this. Have you performed autopsies before of people that have died of heart attacks?
I have.
Have that been on few or many occasions?
That's been on many, many occasions.
What kind of things are you looking for in order to rule out a heart attack or say that heart attack is the cause of death?
I'm looking for a number of things. I'm looking for that type of injury that is present in the back part of the wall that we saw in the photograph where it was thin. I'm looking for dissolved brown reddish looking tissue, possibly with bleeding and hemorrhaging to it. Under the microscope, I'm looking for inflammatory cells of various types. I'm looking for a rebuilding process to indicate that there's some healing that has gone on. Back to the main heart, I do an examination of the coronary artery supply system to the heart, and I look for evidence of blockage in those arteries. I look to see whether that blockage is old and chronic or whether it's acute and very recent.
May I direct you to your internal examination page? Looks to be page 11, cardiovascular system in your report. Are you there?
I'm there.
May I read that to you, doctor? The epicardial surface is smooth and glistening and invested with moderately abundant fat. Anything about that tell you about heart attack or not heart attack?
It does not.
The next sentence. The coronary arteries vary between 20% and 60% luminal, comprised by an atherosclerotic process with moderately dense to global calcification. What is all that?
This is a description of the arterial supply to the heart, and it indicates a severe degree of chronic atherosclerotic disease. Atherosclerotic disease is very common in the United States and is a result of lipid deposits or fatty deposits in the wall of the heart that eventually make the lumen or the center portion of the artery, which carries the blood, it makes that become progressively narrow, and it limits the amount of blood that can be supplied to the heart muscle. This is a severe process here, and it is calcifications. There's actual calcium deposits that are present. These are hard, gritty, granular mineral deposits that are present in the arterial wall.
Did you make any finding regarding the right coronary, artery?
I did.
And what was your finding in that location?
Between 4 centimeters and 4.5 centimeters from the opening, where the artery actually arises at the base of the aorta, which is the big artery that comes out, there's a reddish black thrombotic occlusion that occluded and blocked the flow of blood in that artery.
I am just asking. I don't know. Is that 100% blockage in that artery? Is that what you are saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You note that the heart revealed a pattern of biventricular dilation. What does that mean?
It means the chambers are bigger around than they normally are, both the right and the left ventricles or the lower chambers.
Did either chamber have blood in it?
No.
Does that give you, what does that tell you, anything at all?
Since we are looking at a body that has undergone some decomposition or degenerative change, the lack of blood in the chambers in the heart is not unexpected. It actually escapes from the vessels and from the heart and just goes into the chest.
While we are on blood, doctor, what amount of blood does a typical human body have contained within it?
Usually between 4 and 5 quarts.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not a body would bleed out, so to speak, upon dismemberment after death?
I do.
And what is that opinion?
If the heart has already stopped beating, there will be some loss, but there won't be a complete evacuation of the blood volume.
And just to follow up on that, not complete based on what?
There will be some leakage because there are large vessels that are open, and you can lose blood just from gravity and manipulation and that sort of stuff. But it's not the same thing as if there was a beating heart with a blood pressure, and then a large artery was severed, and there was a huge amount of blood that was lost because of it.
Did you find every main artery in Mr. Black's body to be severed? Arteries going to the legs and arms and head?
They were.
And if you have an opinion whether or not, however, that body may have been moved around after being severed, that blood can drain out as a result of gravity?
Yeah, some of the blood that's in vascularity can drain out, but not all of it.
Okay, where do you go next? I obviously know what I am reading, but where do you go next in your determination to see whether or not this person may have died of a heart attack? What did you look for next?
Well, I described in the gross examination here. Can I read from the report?
If it's true and accurate, yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it is. Sections through the myocardium that is in the heart muscle reveal thinning and atrophy or loss of substance to the back wall of the heart. This is interspersed with fibrous tissue and extensive vascularity. The fibrous tissue and the new blood vessels that are present are part of a repairing process that occurs to that wall after it is trying to recover from a heart attack.
Other than that repairing process, did you see anything else in your microscopic examination of the tissue that gave you any indication of whether there was a heart attack or not at the time of death?
I did.
Can you explain to the jury what you were looking for and what you found?
Yes, I can. Microscopic studies will take a piece of that heart muscle that has the damage that's in it and will put it in a paraffin block after taking all the water out and then slice a piece off, and then a piece of that heart muscle gets put in a glass glide stained with special stains. And what I'm looking at under the microscope is the microscopic appearance of what that heart muscle actually looks like. When I'm examining that tissue, looking for heart attack elements, I'm looking for inflammatory cells as one of the big keys. There are essentially two types of inflammatory cells. There are acute inflammatory cells, which are known as PMNs or polymorphonuclear leukocytes, medical words. These are cells that go in and actually digest dead tissue and engulf it and get rid of it and carry it away. Then there are chronic inflammatory cells, most of which are lymphocytes and other cells that are called macrophages that also come in and try to gobble up stuff. The lymphocytes produce antibodies and also do direct action as part of the chronic healing process. If there are a large number of the acute inflammatory cells, then the heart attack age is quite fresh, on the order of 12 to 72 hours. As time goes on, the number of these cells decrease, and they become replaced by chronic inflammatory cells. The microscopic picture of Morris Black showed much more activity for chronic healing / repairing process than for an acute heart attack that would be between 12 and 72 or 96 hours old.
You said PMNS. They digest the dead tissue?
Yes, they do.
So is it your testimony if you see a high concentration of those, then they are responding to coming to start the healing process?
Yeah, they are the very first response to try to heal. They have to clear out a lot of the dead heart muscle.
And are you saying you found a high concentration of those or a low concentration?
I found a low concentration.
And that again is indicative of what?
Of the fact that we are much farther along, that in chronic process, and this is probably months old in terms of its healing.
Did you do anything else to confirm or rule out heart attack as a cause of death?
Nothing comes to mind.
Based then on your examination of the microscopic slides and the heart itself, did you form an opinion as to whether or not the heart attack caused the death of Mr. Black?
I don't think the heart attack caused his death.
Well, you did some further studies also. Did you not, regarding the lungs of Mr. Black?
Yes, I did.
And was that also, or was that not, in search of still what might be the cause of death?
Correct.
Before we get to the lungs, let me ask you about other body organs. Did you look at the spleen?
Yes, I did.
Did you know any type of injury or any sort, anything like that, to the spleen?
I did not.
The kidneys, Dr. Harvey?
The kidneys showed old chronic changes that are part of a chronic disease process that's going on. There's old inflammation of the kidneys, and because the kidneys are the source of blood pressure control, the fact that there's old chronic disease of the kidneys is another point in saying he probably has high blood pressure.
What about the liver?
The only thing that was remarkable in the liver were a couple of incidental findings that are not uncommon to find in a series of routine autopsies. These are called hemangiomas, and they are just a little proliferation of blood vessels in the liver and a concentration that forms a little mass that's full of blood.
Take you back just briefly to when you opened the chest cavity. Did you have any signs of internal bruising to indicate any type of hits being delivered to Mr. Black or blows to the front part of his body in any way?
No.
No internal injuries that you saw, bruising or anything?
I did not see any internal injuries.
Thank you. Moving along to the lungs then, what were you looking for in your initial exam of the lungs?
The usual sorts of things that you look for when you're doing an autopsy, and he had some of that. I mean, he had evidence that he was a chronic smoker and had disease from that. The more remarkable thing about the lungs was that there was a pattern of aspirated blood that was present and could be seen in the lungs. This is blood that is breathed in from up above.
Is that something you see microscopically or just a visual observation of the lungs themselves or both?
It's both.
Microscopically, what are you looking for? For aspirated blood?
I'm looking for red blood cells that are present inside of the alveolar space, the alveoli, the little air sacs, that's the end of the system from the pulmonary system. And it is surrounded by capillaries and forms in place where the oxygen is able to be absorbed by the blood.
You mentioned that aspirated blood is blood that comes from above. What do you mean comes from above? I think those were your words.
That was my words. The autonomy of the lungs is such that the bottom of the pulmonary divisions are the air sacs. Those group together to form tiny passages. These passages become bigger passages, and these are tubes. And they eventually become bronchi that come out from the lungs and join together to form a trachea that goes up to the voice box.
Let me interrupt you, if I might, Doctor. Let me show you something. I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as 490 and 491, with these exhibits such that they would help you explain to the jury what we are talking about.
Yes, they would.
Tender and offer states 490 and 491.
No objection. They are admitted.
Which one do you want to start with, Doctor, to explain?
Let's start with this one.
Dates exhibit 490.
Starting at the bottom of the pulmonary tree, we see these little rounded things. These are the actual air sacs, and they join together and eventually produce little tubes that come to bigger tubes, they come to bigger tubes, and eventually end up forming the bronchus. And then this is the trachea with the junction of the two bronchi. This goes up to the voice box. And at the top of the voice box, there's a complex mechanism that you don't breathe your food in when you eat it. First, it closes off the top of the voice box, but you breathe in air and it gets transmitted through the breathing tubes all the way down here to these end alveoli and air sacs.
Okay, and when you were talking about slides that you looked at slides at what particular tissue?
Well, you take a section of lung and you put it through the same process, just like I described for the heart. Then what you look at is a section that cuts through the microscopic appearance of the lungs, and it shows the outline of these alveoli. And every once in a while, you see a bronchus or a small bronchus on the lungs side as well.
Okay, are you ready for this one?
Yes.
States exhibit 491. What are we looking at?
This basically just shows the inside branching of these tubes as they connect to the lung. This is useful to show that these little tubes branch many, many, many times. And it's just a huge number of little tubes that get out in order to try to get air into the whole volume of the lung.
I am kind of confused. Maybe you can help explain a little bit. How? You are saying that blood from above, you're referring to blood coming through the bronchial tube here?
Correct?
And how? Explain how you visually see on the lungs blood that has come through the bronchial tube and ended up in the alveolar sacs or alveoli. Are you saying you actually see something on the tissue visually?
Okay, the gross examination of the lung, I hold the lung in my hand and I look at it, and I take a sharp knife and I cut across the surface of it to produce a plain section and can look at it. There's a fairly typical kind of pattern that we see as forensic pathologists. There are a lot of instances in which there's blood that is breathed into the lungs as we see this aspirated patterns. It looks a little bit like the spots of a leopard, except the spots are reddish brown instead of black. I oftentimes use that as a description to describe it. We'll call that pattern leopard spotting.
How are you able to differentiate just blood on the lung versus aspirated blood when you are visually looking at the red spot on a lung? If you would explain that, please.
Okay, running alongside these bronchi, these breathing tubes, are little blood vessels. And they also branch repeatedly to make huge numbers of little tiny branches that go out. When I look at a lung grossly that is only an engorgement with blood because the heart is failing, or for some other reason, and I cut across it, I see a uniform pattern of reddish brown color rather than a spotted pattern. That's the way that I tell the difference between the aspirated blood and the blood that is present as a pattern that we call passive congestion or backup of blood into the vascular aspect of the lung uniformly. In automobile accidents, we see bruising that occurs where there's actual impact on the lung, and it produces a bruise just like if I whacked my arm with a hammer and put a bruise on it. That is a larger, more confluent, dense hemorrhagic process and is different than an aspirated blood appearance when you look at the lung grossly.
Did you take photographs of what you described for the jury? The coloration, the red coloration in the lung that's actually visible, and also slides of lung tissue as you indicated?
Yes, I took photographs of both the microscopic slides that I looked at and of the fixed lung tissue. When I did the autopsy, I took a little chunk of lung and I put it in a stock jar that had a formaldehyde in it, and that preserves it. And this photograph that I took shows that rounded spotting pattern that was present.
Doctor, I show you what's been marked 486, 485, 484, 483, and 482. Do you recognize these?
Yes, I do.
Do they accurately represent the lung tissue and the slides that you prepared at the time?
They do.
We offer those exhibits, Judge.
Admitted.
482, 483, 484, and 486. Doctor, I'm handing you what's been introduced as 482. Would you please tell the jury what 482 shows?
This shows a cut section of preserved lung that's been pulled out of the stock jar. And there's a pattern here that's this gray pattern. There's a large bronchus and some blood vessels that are present. I draw your attention to this rounded area right here, which has a reddish brown appearance. Now, it's difficult to distinguish it from the dark appearance of the rest of the lung in the background, but that has got blood that has infiltrated into the alveolar sacs in the lung that's been breathed in and produces kind of a rounded, dense leopard spot area. The magnification on this, these are 1 millimeter sections, so this is, roughly 2.5 inches across here, not much bigger than that. So it's fairly magnified.
States 483, is this a different view of a different piece of a lung?
This is a different piece of lung and shows the brownish red spotting that occurs here and here, up in here.
And again, this brownish red spotting is indicative of what?
Aspirated blood that has been breathed in through the breathing tube.
State's 484.
484 is a nice magnification, enlarged magnification of a piece preserved lung tissue that actually shows this rounded area in a little bit better contrast. And that's reddish brown aspirated blood that is in those air sacs and has this typical gross configuration when I look at the lung. That will be the area from which I took the microscopic section.
You also testified you took microscopic slides just to confirm your thoughts that that was aspirated blood. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I don't know if we should show these both at the same time or not, but I am holding up 485 and 486. What do these slides represent, doctor?
Okay, this is what it looks like under the microscope and its magnification. It's a tiny area. I look at this one first because it shows these linear or wavy kind of pink areas of tissue with the dark dots that are in them. This is an alveolus or an air sac. There is an alveolus up here, there's another alveolus here, and you can see there are red dots in there. Those red dots are red blood cells. And there are also red blood cells that are present inside the blood vessels that are part of the lining of the wall of the alveolar sac. This exhibit here, 486, just simply shows that a little farther in towards the area where it turns really brown. The concentration of these little red dots, or red blood cells, is very great, and it tends to almost to make it difficult to see these edges of the air sacs that are present, but they were there. This is a dense amount of blood that is present and is part of this breathing in of blood into the lungs.
Doctor, as part of your autopsy process on Morris Black, did you have occasion to request a toxicology?
I did.
And what is the purpose? Would you explain to the jury, please, the toxicology inquiry?
Toxicology is done on biological specimens to try to determine the presence or absence of chemicals and medicines and substances that can be distributed in the body.
So you're basically looking for what medications or whatever drugs may be inside Morris Black at the time of his death?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell us what medical examiner number you assigned to the autopsy of Morris Black?
It's ML2001-491.
And did you have occasion then to send samples off to a Donna Troutman, or I guess I could say Universal Toxicology Laboratories for examination?
I did.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers State's Exhibit 159, a stipulation of evidence between both defense and the state regarding Donna Troutman's testimony if she would be here to testify.
No objection. All right.
Donna Troutman is a senior toxicologist with the Universal Toxicology Laboratories. The Universal Toxicology Laboratories received a blood specimen from an unidentified male, case number ML2001-491, from the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office. The purpose of these specimens was to perform toxicology analysis of the submitted blood specimen. Toxicology examination and screening is an accepted and valid scientific theory and technique by the relevant scientific community. Donna Troutman is a qualified expert to testify about toxicology screening and analysis. Literature exists that supports the underlying scientific theory and technique of toxicology testing and analysis. Toxicology screening and analysis is universally accepted scientific evidence in courts of Texas and around the country, and therefore, the results of toxicology screening and analysis have been admitted under the Daubert-Kelly standards for scientific evidence. The blood specimens in this case were obtained from the pleural cavity. Vitreous fluid was unavailable from the unknown male. Vitreous fluid, which is obtained from the eye, is used for confirmation of the alcohol content. The specimens in this case were received in a sealed condition from the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office. The containers were properly sealed, and no evidence of tampering was evident on the containers. Toxicology analysis was performed on the submitted specimens for drugs of abuse, quantitative tests, other tests which salicylate spot test, tricyclic antidepressant screen, and acetaminophen screen. These tests include screens for, but are not limited to, cocaine, amphetamines, marijuana, PCP, barbiturates, Valium, MDMA, ecstasy, opiates, methadone, and methaqualone. The toxicology analysis and screens were done by scientifically accepted methods and produced accurate results. The technicians that performed the toxicology analysis and screens were competent to do so and followed the appropriate scientific methods, techniques, and procedures. The scientific methods and techniques and procedures used in these analyses produced accurate results. The results of the different screens are reflected in the report, which is attached to this stipulation and incorporated as part of this stipulation. Doctor, if you would read into the record, please, the findings on the drugs of abuse screen, the quantitative test results, and other tests. Would you read those into the record for us?
Drugs of abuse screen, decomposition fluid negative, quantitative tests, decomposition fluid alcohol, ethyl 0.01%, with a note that says positive alcohol results may be from early decomposition. Vitreous, unavailable for confirmation. The next line says decomposition fluid alcohol, N-propanol, acetone, methanol, isoprop negative. The next heading is other tests. Decomposition fluid salicylate spot test negative. Decomposition fluid tricyclic antidepressant screen negative. Decomposition fluid acetaminophen screen negative.
Thank you, doctor. Now regarding the fluid alcohol again, what does that note explain? The 0.01% was detected, is that correct?
Yes, that explains the presence of this very low amount of alcohol, or can be due to breakdown from decomposition, in which the bacteria produced some alcohol as they do the degeneration processing of the body.
So degeneration process versus actually having consumed alcohol, we just can't tell. Is that what that indicates?
Yes.
Doctor, you had how many different parts of the body to examine?
I have the torso, the right leg, the left leg, and right arm and left arm.
And by what process or examination were you able to make a determination as to whether or not each of those parts went to that torso and each of those parts went to what we have identified as Morris Black?
We obtained biological tissue from the torso and from each one of the extremities and submitted them to the DNA laboratory at the University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth under the direction of Dr. Arthur Eisenberg. And we received a report from that institution that indicated that the DNA profiles for each of the extremities and the torso all matched.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers 158. Previous stipulation of evidence entered into by both parties regarding the identification of body parts.
No objection. Admitted.
May I read that into the record?
Yes.
John B. Plants, Ph.D., is the Associate Director of the DNA Identity Laboratory at the University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth. The Health Science Center received from the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office samples containing DNA from one torso, one left arm, one...
We have a stipulation to avoid reading these couple pages. These are all the body parts of Morris Black.
Yeah.
So stipulated.
You can just skip to the next question.
Okay.
Thank you. The court accepts that stipulation.
Doctor, I'm
Can
going...
you just state for the record which page and lines were skipped so we have it in the record?
Pages 56, 57, and that's it. 56 and 57.
Okay, thank you.
Do I start? Doctor, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification, already have been admitted as states 160. Business medical record of cardiovascular specialist of Texas in Texas City, Texas. And I have marked the pages that I'm going to refer you to, okay? Are you ready, doctor? Okay. Referring you to the page that's entitled Mainland Medical Center Cardiac Catheterization Laboratory. Are you on that page now?
I am.
Okay, and who is the attending physician of Morris Black noted?
Sid Akaria?
And do you see the date of procedure?
Yes.
And what is that date of procedure?
06/01/01.
And are you able to tell from that page what particular procedure was done on Morris Black June of 2001?
Yes.
Okay, and would you describe that for the jury, please?
There was a left heart catheterization. There was selective right and left coronary angiography, and there was left ventriculography.
And in layman's terms?
They placed a catheter into his vascular system and advanced it so that it went up into the vessels in his heart and proceeded to take x-rays of the vessels in the heart and also took x-rays of the left ventricle of the heart.
Referring you to the page next then, does it note any particular amount of blockage in the heart of Morris Black on June 1st, 2001?
Several areas.
Can you describe for the jury, please, those noted blockage areas?
The left anterior descending coronary artery, which is the artery that runs down the front part of the heart on the left ventricle, has about 50 to 60% blockage. The circumflex coronary artery, which runs around the side of the heart, has about 20% blockage. First obtuse marginal branch, which comes off of that circumflex and goes to the side of the heart, has 20% blockage. The right coronary has an area toward the beginning with 25% blockage. The middle region of the right coronary artery, which provides the supply to the back part of the heart, has 50% blockage.
Now, those findings of June of 2001, do they also represent, or I guess confirm your findings that he had a severe heart disease?
They do.
If I may direct you back to the next page that should be marked, the next marked page with the yellow sticky.
Okay.
UTMB Cardiac Catheterization Report, is that the title?
No, the next marked page is an impression from June.
You can refer to that. I apologize. The impression is that something that's noted after the procedure was done?
Yes, this is the conclusions that are put together after you've done all the testing and work.
And what was the recommendation of the impression? Would you read that into the record, please?
Do you want me to read the entire paragraph then?
Yes, please, sir.
The patient was essentially patent or open stent sites with moderately severe lesions in the right and mid coronary artery and left anterior descending. Medical therapy continuation and reevaluation in 6 months with possible stress tests was recommended. Should chest pain be recurrent and if ischemia or reduced blood flow through the artery is demonstrated, intervention of these arteries should be undertaken with additional stenting. Other option would be 2-vessel bypass surgery. This was discussed with the patient in the office at a subsequent visit. He wanted a trial of medical therapy.
Now, if we would move along then to the next marked page, is that the one, the UTMB Cardiac Catheterization Report?
It is.
And the date of that procedure, doctor?
Is 03/02/99.
And what was the procedure done on Morris Black on that date? I believe you can find it under the comments.
I see multiple stenting of the left anterior descending coronary artery and recanalization, or opening of the stenting of the left circumflex coronary artery.
And what amount of blockage, if any, is noted in that report that he had prior to the procedure?
The left anterior descending is diffusely diseased with sequential stenosis, 80 to 90%, involving proximal and mid portions. Left circumflex is totally occluded as to mid portion.
Totally occluded means totally blocked, is that correct?
Totally blocked, no flow.
And that's on March 2nd, 1999, correct?
Correct.
And I refer you to the last marked page. Is that also a UTMB Cardiac Interventional Procedure Report?
It is.
And the date of that procedure?
It is 02/12/99.
And can you describe for the jury in layman's terms the the procedure that was done on that date?
They did a procedure that's called balloon angioplasty. They insert the catheter into, in this case, the left cervical circumflex artery, push it into an area where there's a complete 100% occlusion, and then activate it. And there's a thin little balloon that blows up and mashes the thrombus against the side of the wall and opens up the artery for blood flow.
And the blockage that was noted on February 12th of 1999, could you please read that into the record?
Okay, for the left circumflex, it was 100% or total blockage. Then after the procedure, there was no blockage, 0%.
Okay, and then based on your previous reading into the record on less than a month later, March of 1999, was that same artery occluded again, 90% or totally occluded?
That was totally occluded.
What does that tell you within a month? They have done a balloon procedure and cleared it totally, and a month later, it's totally blocked. Does that tell us anything about the man's condition, his physical well-being, so to speak?
His coronary arteries are in bad shape, very bad shape.
Does a person with that type of disease that you found on autopsies and which we have noted in these medical records, does that person have any, or do you have an opinion as to whether a person with that type of cardiac disease would have a different response to, say, a controlled physical type of environment versus perhaps an unexpected physical occurrence, so to speak?
There's differences between them.
Can a man like this take a walk down the seawall with this kind of heart condition? Do you have an opinion?
Most likely he can.
As a person with the same heart condition, do you have an opinion as to whether or not they would stand up with any kind of physical response as to aggression of any kind?
That has the potential for being lethal.
Could be, but there's no certainty to it. Is that what you were saying?
There's no certainty to it at all.
But given the comparison of Mr. Black's heart condition to a person even at age 71 with a normal heart, Mr. Black could have a possibility of having some problems under stress. Is that correct?
Correct.
Back to the gunshot, okay? Let's focus again in that area. You are still looking, are you not, for a cause of death even after you have done the lung examination and seen the aspiration. Is that correct? Or are you slowly changing or coming to a decision at that point?
I still don't have a clear-cut cause of death.
Okay, let me ask you this. In your experience, have you performed autopsies on people who have died as a result of gunshot wounds to the head?
I have.
Has that been on few or many occasions?
Many occasions.
Do you have an estimate for us about how many of those you might have done in your career?
Oh gosh, it's really difficult. I imagine it's probably more than 1,500 maybe. That's a lot, but...
Now, in those cases, have you also had occasion to find aspirated blood, the type of symptoms that you have described for us earlier to the jury in the lung tissue?
Yes, that occurs fairly frequently.
And what process, what allows, if you can characterize it, what happens when a bullet enters the head that somehow allows blood to enter into the lungs based on your experience in those autopsies?
There's a fracturing of bones that occurs at the base of the skull and in the front part. These are thin bones and fracture relatively easy anyway. And when those bones fracture, that allows an opening for bleeding to occur into the nasopharynx region. And then that can be breathed in respiration movements.
So you were just saying bones break and blood comes where? Into the front cranial area?
When blood comes from bleeding that occurs in the cranial cavity itself. And also, there's a rich blood supply in the soft tissues that are around the fractured bone tissue. And that can be a source of some additional blood as well.
With the court's permission, I am using what's been previously admitted for demonstrative purposes 473. I'm showing you the internal, looking at the head in this configuration. What area are you referring to where the bones would break and lead into the bronchial area, the breathing area?
These bony areas that are at the top of the nose and the base of the eye orbit are the fragile bones.
And when you say fragile as compared to what?
Well, the back part of the skull is thicker, and it's certainly a great deal more resilient.
Can you point with your pointer then and tell us what?
Okay, this is the floor of the frontal portion of the bone, and that particular little rounded area over there is over top of the eyeball. And in the middle between the two eyes is a similar area of thin bone that's called the cribriform plate, and it is on the top of the nasopharynx. And both of those bony areas are frequently fractured in head trauma and bleed into the nasopharynx.
And as we continue then to underneath the eye socket area, what area are you referring to that would be broken?
Okay, the eyeball here is in the way, but the bony surface on the top of that is the one that breaks. And then this area right in here is at the top of the nasopharynx. So in the posterior portion, there's this hollow area. This is the nose right here, and the hole in the nose that comes in and breathes into this big space in the back. And this fracturing and bleeding occurs up in this area and goes right down the back into the throat.
And you have seen that numerous times. Is that your testimony in your gunshot wounds to the head autopsies?
Yes, I have.
When we were talking about thick bone versus thin bone, do you have an idea? I know we don't have Morse Black's head, but how thin is that bone typically in that area that allows it to shatter simply because a bullet has discharged into the head?
Usually average about 1 millimeter in thickness. That's very thin. It's slightly thicker than a 1/16 of an inch.
Based on your examination of the lungs and the slide tissue from the lungs and your previous experience, you have an opinion as to whether or not your findings of the aspirated blood are consistent with Morris Black having been shot in the head with a handgun. What is that opinion?
That they are consistent?
Dr. Harvey, we have been everywhere on Morris Black except for Morris Black's back. And that's where I would like to direct you to in your report now, if you have a particular location. Directing you back to your chart, States Exhibit 501. Could you describe with your pointer again what injuries, if any, you noted or the location or approximate location of the injuries you noted, if any, on the back of Morris Black?
There's an area of bruising over the shoulders on both sides of the upper back. This is 17 by 4. This area is 17 by 4 inches, and it shows multiple dark reddish-brown bruises that are present, that are occasionally blended together, and I call that confluency. There is an area here on the left side of the back that's 6 by 2.5 inches, and it's scattered multiple reddish-brown bruises that vary between 1/2 and 1/8 of an inch in diameter. There's an area here in the middle of the back that has a 1-inch diameter reddish-brown bruise. There's an area here on the right side of the chest, posteriorly on the back side, that has a series of 3 reddish-brown bruises, each of them about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. They're arranged in a somewhat triangular configuration so that the points of the triangle are separated by 2¼ inches. There's another area of bruising at the hollow of the back, reddish-brown, 5.5 by 1½ inches. And presumably there's a bruise here on the hip on the left side posteriorly that's 3/4 of an inch in diameter.
Comparing those bruises and the color of them, did they all seem to have generally the same color or not?
Yes.
Were you able to make any determination as to whether or not these were bruises occurring before or after death?
I think they occurred before death.
And what makes you think they occurred before death?
The intensity of the color and the reaction, the roundness of the lesions to indicate that there's a blood pressure that seeps out and produces that kind of configuration. The fact that they run into the deep part of the skin tissue, in some occasions, they actually penetrate into the area below the skin. They're of more severe nature than just a causal superficial bump bruise that are not of the superficial type that you see if we grab a deceased body by the shoulders and try to move it. You might cause a little bit of bruising and breakdown in the skin surface, but that's usually the surface of the skin, and it's very mild-like.
When you say bruises occurred before death, are you saying that the injury occurred before death or the actual bruising occurred before death?
Well, the bruising and the injury are part of the same process.
Let me ask it this way. If I am injured immediately before death, in a hypothetical case, will my body form a bruise in that area once my heart is through beating?
Once you lose blood pressure, the evolution of the bruise really doesn't continue.
Okay, and the colors of these bruises indicate what degree of evolution, so to speak?
Oh, these are fresh bruises. There's no yellowish component. In order to say we have an old bruise, we have to see a yellow color breakdown.
And when you say fresh, are you able to determine with any certainty a range of these bruises? How long before death they may have occurred?
Well, the yellow color doesn't usually start to develop until after about a week, and that can vary from individual to individual. Generally the reddish brown coloration is there seems to indicate to me that they are less than a week old.
Can you tell how close to the time of death that the injury would have occurred that would have produced these bruises?
Not reliably.
Did you take photographs of these injuries?
I did.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as states 493 and 494. Do you recognize these?
Yes, I do.
Do these accurately represent the condition of the back of Mr. Black at the time you viewed it?
They do.
State offers 493 and 494. Doctor, if you don't mind, I'm going to show you 493, and then if you would hold it up in front of the jury, describe what injuries are seen on the back, and then walk back and forth in front of the jury so they can observe the photo.
This is the back surface. This is the upper shoulders. This is the hips down here, the hollow of the back. There's a pattern of bruising that extends clear across the shoulders, and it appears to be made up of individual rounded reddish-purple bruises that are present. And this pattern tends to seep out from a dark central area to produce normally a gradual fading of pattern as the bruise evolves and develops. There's bruising here on the left part of the right back. It's present. There's a big bruise in the middle of the back, and then there's a very prominent bruise right across the small of the back in the hollow part.
I'm showing you states 494 then. If you would do the same with the jury.
This is the view of the, in this view, the torso is face down so that the back part is up toward the ceiling, and this shows the right side of the body. Again, you can see the the superior portion of the shoulder here with the bruising that has occurred there. The triangle of bruises that I was talking about are here, here, and here, a little bit more faint. You can see the bruises in the hollow of the back.
Just for record purposes, Doctor, 494 states 494 shows injuries 3 and 6. Would that be correct if you will refer to your chart?
3 and 6.
What does your writing say on the back as you indicated?
I have 3, 6 here. This is the bruise on the hip.
You need to show the jury, please.
That's number 6 down here, right here. And then I think there's 3, 3 is the triangle pattern of bruises.
And then 493, correct? As you noted, it shows injuries to 5 and 4, if you would reference your chart.
2, 5, and 4, and actually part of 1 as well.
May we publish these to the jury judge? Doctor, referring you back to what's been labeled on your diagram as injury number 2, is that the top left and right back? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I noted that you gave a measurement that indicated that that was one continuous type of area. I mean, is that one solid bruise? How are you characterizing the bruises in that area?
I'm saying that this is an area with multiple bruises that are within it.
Does that give you any type of indication what type of instrument or whatever may have caused, what type of force of nature or whatever might have been on the back of that area to cause that bruise, those bruises?
Well, because there are multiple bruises that are present, there are a number of different explanations for trying to produce that bruising.
Do you have an opinion on whether or not those multiple bruises are consistent with Morris Black having fallen onto a flat floor?
It does not. I don't think it is consistent with falling on a flat plane surface.
And why do you not think it's consistent with falling on a flat plane surface?
Because there are actually multiple rounded bruises that are present in that area, and it would be more consistent with falling on a coarse gravel driveway or something like that.
The injury in the small of the back, is that injury number 5?
Yes.
What's the dimensions of that injury again?
5.5 by 1.5 inches.
Is that one solid bruise or several little ones in the same area?
I have it described in my report as a single bruise, and it looks in the photograph that as if it might be a single bruise.
Do you have the photograph in front of you?
No, I do not. The photograph tends to change that opinion a little bit. There are areas on here which are darker and then lighter and then darker and lighter, and it might have been multiple impact areas.
Is a multiple impact area consistent with having fallen on a flat plane or surface?
No, in an area that's concave in the back, no.
Do you recognize the area in that bruise? Do you recognize the area in that bruise is in the part of the back that's curved inward then?
Correct.
Injury number 4 in the mid-back region. Is that one contusion or more than one contusion?
It looks like it's a single contusion.
And you are looking at the photograph, is that correct?
I'm looking at the photograph, yes, sir.
Any indications as to what type of instrument or what might have caused that?
Well, it's slightly oval and rounded.
The triangular area, doctor, what number is that again?
That's number 3.
Is number 3, does it appear to be equidistant between those 3 bruises?
I thought so at the time I did the examination.
Okay, what does that indicate to you, if anything? What is it consistent with, if you have an opinion?
Well, probably 3 separate blows that have occurred in a triangular distribution.
And the size of those?
The individual bruises are about 3/4 of an inch in diameter each, and they're separated from each other by a distance of 2 1/4 inches.
Injury number 1, doctor, then, referring you to your description of injuries, you describe an area 6 by 2.5 inches. Is that multiple contusions or one large contusion?
That's multiple contusions.
And do those diameters vary?
Yes, they're between 1/8 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch in diameter.
Taken overall, the totality of these bruises on the back of Morris Black, what do they indicate to you, if anything? Do you have an opinion as regarding the cause of these injuries in any way?
Well, the fact that they are multiple is significant. The fact that they tend to be roughly round is probably significant. I suppose that there are a number of different possible explanations as to what caused them.
And again, your window on these bruises, the injuries that would have caused these bruises go all the way out to 5 days. Is that your testimony?
I don't think that that's obligatory, but I do think that you sometimes don't see the yellowish breakdown product until after about 5 days.
Let me ask you this, doctor. Does a shot to the head equate with the heart immediately stop beating?
Not necessarily.
So it's within the realm of medical science that one's heart can begin to beat after being shot in the head. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you mentioned bruises require at least some type of blood pressure going on. Is that correct, doctor?
Correct.
Are you able to maintain a blood pressure in a human body even though you may have a wound to the head?
Yes.
Within your reasonable medical probability, do you have any opinion at all as to whether or not the aspirated blood that you found within the lungs and the lung tissue is consistent with an individual having been shot in the head?
It is consistent.
Dr. Harvey, you have previously reviewed, have you not, excerpts of medical records from both UTMB and Columbia Mainland Center Hospital. Dr. Acharya?
I have.
State offers states 161 and 162, previously filed in August 3rd of 2003. August 8th. Dr. Harvey, when we left off, I was trying to ask you a question, and let me try it one more time, okay? Are you able to say with any reasonable medical certainty whether or not the injuries causing those bruises occurred within minutes, hours, or days of the death of Morris Black?
No, I'm not.
You just can't say because you don't know the nature of the injury, the head injury?
Yes, because it relates to how long the heart was beating.
Okay, do you know Dr. Petty seated here in the courtroom?
Yes.
Behind me to my left?
Yes, sir.
And have you met on one or more occasion with defense counsel or even Dr. Petty to discuss your findings and conclusions?
I have.
And did you recently, at request of defense counsel, submit tissue samples for some work regarding the bruising areas of the back of Mr. Black?
I did.
Specifically, can you point out to the jury with your pointer on your diagram which areas you made what you could call it cuts, incisions?
Well, I took skin samples.
Skin samples. Please show us what areas of the skin samples you took for the judge and for the jury, please.
I took skin samples from this big area of bruising across the back on both the right side and left side. I took skin samples from this bruise on either side. I took samples from the buttocks and samples from that area up in the back where there are no injuries.
And the purpose of taking those samples, doctor, was what?
To look to see if there were red blood cells or red blood cell breakdown productions in the skin surface to try to determine if there was bruising that was present versus lividity.
What you initially saw in the photographs that have already been submitted, what is your opinion, that those are bruises or not bruises?
Those are bruises.
And you're doing the supplemental search at the request of the defense, is that correct?
Correct.
Can you tell us what findings resulted as you have submitted these tissue samples for further review?
Basically, the microscopic sections from the areas that are indicated as the bruising where I took those samples from shows either red blood cells or red blood cell breakdown products in the skin tissues or immediately below the skin tissues, whereas the areas from the buttocks, which were pale and the blood was pressed out of those tissues, did not show any red blood cell production products or individual red blood cells themselves, consistent with a pattern of blanching from lividity.
Again, the purpose was to determine whether or not you were really looking at lividity or bruising, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, it was clearly on in your testimony. What is lividity again?
Lividity is the settling of the red blood cells due to gravity.
And what was the purpose of taking tissue? Did you take tissue in the lividity area too, or not, or outside the lividity?
Actually, I was trying to take the areas where there was lividity and then pressure branching to get the border areas between. And
Anything about the results of your slides that caused you to change your interpretation from your original?
no, sir.
Pass the witness.
Your Honor, rather than break up, we can't finish this today, and rather than break up the cross, I'd rather and request that we recess until the next time in court so we can have all the cross at one time.
Let me see how many more pages do we have?
It's about
30 pages.
30 more pages.
Bailey?
What's that?
Bailey,
There's 30 pages.
do you agree?
That's fine.
All right. Then we'll, you can come back here on the 7th, can't you? Are you available on the 7th? You're doing such a fine job. It's not easy to pronounce these medical terms. And so,
Your mother will be happy that you're a doctor.
yeah.
Instead of a lawyer.
No, I just play one in court. Okay, so. All right, everyone, so do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with the case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. No tweeting, Facebook, or other social media regarding the case. Don't talk about the case or any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. If you happen to encounter any media reports in the newspaper or online or on television, just change the channel. Don't read them. Do not make up your mind about any issue until after you discuss the case with the other jurors during deliberations. I think we've all earned a nice, restful time off, so enjoy your families, and stay healthy. Be careful out there. Be careful of those variants floating around. And I look forward to seeing you next week. So you now excuse for the day. Department 1's adjourned. Yes. Oh, no, that's a fine point. Thanks for the reminder. Is that, what time did I say? 9:45. I wrote that, oh, July. There it is. 9:45, you sure are right. 9:45, everyone, on July 7th. Department 1 is adjourned. Happy 4th.